Good morning, everybody. This is your friend Lori Spencer from the Strange Bedfellows podcast and Maverick News. Caleb Maupin, my good pal, asked me to record this morning message for my friends at CPI. And I was trying to think of what to say. I wanted to find something motivational to start your day. And I couldn't think of a more appropriate topic than peace and our ongoing struggle to bring peace between the United States and the Western democracies and Russia. And as you guys know, I'm a historian. I love to read history. And, I've been saying for several years now that I think our country needs another FDR. And I think we need that now more than ever. And I know that my friends at CPI, who also study history, understand why I say that. FDR was really the last president we had who had good relations with Russia and the Soviet Union during his time. The United States officially recognized the Soviet Union, and of course, we were supplying the Soviet Union with the armaments and the funding that they needed to win World War II for us. And Roosevelt owed Joseph Stalin a great debt, and he never forgot it. Unlike Winston Churchill and the other leaders, Roosevelt and Stalin actually cultivated a wonderful kind of friendship. They had great respect for one another, and Roosevelt treated Stalin with due respect, which is something that very few of our leaders since have done. So I've been buried in this wonderful book lately. If you can see that, this is about Franklin Roosevelt's final year of life. In 1944-45, as the war was coming to a head and starting to work in the Allies' favor and in Russia's favor, unfortunately, Roosevelt was a very sick man. He was only 63 years old, but of course he had a number of ailments that were killing him. And I truly believe, especially after reading this book, which I recommend very much, it's called His Final Battle, The Last Months of Franklin Roosevelt by Joseph Lelyfeld. Really good book. And I'm going to read a little of it to you today. I'm going to read you a few pertinent excerpts here while we have the time. He was on his deathbed, literally, but Roosevelt desperately wanted to live long enough to see the United Nations become the framework for a peaceful post-war world. And he knew that that couldn't happen without Joseph Stalin, without that mutual cooperation. And Roosevelt, I truly believe, was willing himself to live. He was willing himself to get through it until the end of the war. And unfortunately, he didn't make it. He died on April 12th, 1945, just shortly before Germany surrendered and the war ended. So I wanted to read you a few quotes. And this one in particular really jumped out at me, and I think it will for you too. In March of 1945, a month before he died, he gave an interview to Anne O'Hare McCormick in the New York Times. And he said, the key to many of the actions and decisions of the president lies in his desire to win the confidence of Stalin and draw Russia into full partnership in the peace. He makes it very clear what he's all about towards the end. At his fourth inaugural speech, January 20th, 1945, Franklin Roosevelt, if you look at the pictures or the newsreels, he was visibly ailing. This man was dying in front of our eyes. The outgoing vice president, Henry Wallace, who had been replaced by Harry Truman, in fact, he had to swear Truman in that day, which must have been awkward for Wallace. But he wrote in his diary that he saw FDR suffering some kind of seizure just before he began his inaugural address. Wallace writes, his whole body shook, especially his right arm, which grasped the rail. And once President Roosevelt regained his composure, he began to speak. And he said, You will understand, and I believe agree with my wish that the form of this inauguration be simple and its words brief. And brief it was. It was only 573 words, less than 5 minutes. That's the shortest inaugural address ever in our nation's history. And he said, the only way to have a friend is to be one. And he was referring to Joseph Stalin and collectively the Soviet Union. He said, we can gain no lasting peace if we approach it with suspicion or mistrust or with fear, which was a throwback to his 1933 inaugural, his famous quote, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Roosevelt said, we can gain it only if we approach it with the understanding and confidence and courage which flow from conviction. God, he said, had given our country, quote, a faith which has become the hope of all peoples in an anguished world. And he prayed for the vision to see our way clearly. President Roosevelt spoke of God's will and peace on earth. For a dying wartime president, these pieties were not empty platitudes. He knew he was going home to meet his maker very soon. He knew his time on this earth wasn't long. He would survive almost to the end of the war, but not live long enough to see or shape the peace. So I bring this up because, of course, we have an ailing president right now. We have Joe Biden running for re-election. There are many parallels between this election and the election of 1944. You might want to dig into that. And if you're reading a little bit of FDR history, I do, once again, recommend this book. Thanks, everybody. Power to the people, power to CPI. And Caleb Maupin, you guys keep up the good work and peace.